All right. Good morning to everyone. This is András Baneth from Brussels, and a warm welcome to everyone to this live webinar. I just want to make sure that you can hear me well, you can see me well. As usual, I just put my video for a short while before we get into the presentation mode, and everything seems to be working fine. So why don't you type in where you are listening to this workshop, the city perhaps, or the country. And as always, we do a little contest: who is dialing in from the most further away from Brussels. Athens is the winner so far as I can tell. Perhaps Romania. Okay, Brussels is certainly close enough. Helsinki, Prague, all over the place. This is fascinating. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me on this amazing topic, which is how to write better emails and be more productive at work. This one is a little different from the previous editions and the previous sessions because this is not directly linked to EPSO issues and EU careers, but this is something that is such a determining feature of our lives, writing emails and corresponding with colleagues and trying to pitch ourselves in cover letters or invite speakers to an event that you might be organizing. So this is a very overarching and very broad topic. So with that, I'll turn off my camera and make sure that with the sound check, you take care of all these best practices. If you can't hear me for whatever reason, usually restarting the browser or using a different browser would do the trick, and then you can hear everything. But the full recording along with the presentation will be available, but you certainly have the benefit of asking questions live that I will answer in the context of today's presentation. So Lenke and Veronica are helping me from afar and making sure that all the technology works fine. So they are working the engine behind the scenes. So with that, I'll turn my camera off and then we'll put this nice little logo and get into today's presentation. So a little bit about my background, you probably know some of it, and do connect with me on LinkedIn. Look me up on LinkedIn and send an invite request. I tend to accept everyone except for those who are trying to sell me something, but sometimes even those can be very interesting and helpful. So please do go ahead and get in touch. And let's get into today's topic of emails. Now, I actually love emails, love crafting difficult emails. I think it's such a challenge and it's such an interesting exercise in writing that it teaches you a lot when you need to think methodically about emails. Now, email is such an important part of everyone's business life, perhaps even private life, even in the age of other tools. So it's really the number one business communication tool, even if you have Slack or you have Microsoft Teams or WhatsApp or all the multitude of messengers that are out there. Email is a great asynchronous tool. By asynchronous, that means it's not happening at the same time. So you send out a message and someone can respond at their ease, which makes it sometimes more difficult because you need to get a reply, you need to get their answer, and you need to get things moving. So because of that, how you write an email becomes a really important thing. And also written communication can be really an effective way for persuasion. This is not about a tweet. This is not about really an instant messaging, short form communication. Email can be very thoughtful, can be very thorough, and it can lead to a good written piece that persuades or convinces the other person or the other party. And then it's a productivity issue where there are just so many bad emails out there. I get those every day. And sometimes I write those myself, even if I am sharing you a lot of experience and ideas today. But we are all guilty of being too fast and perhaps not thoughtful enough in writing messages. But email can be very, very productive because it's a concise way of conveying information. It's a great tool to summarize things and then get an effective answer. But it can really go astray. It can really go in the route where you exchange 5, 10, 15 different emails back and forth without actually getting to resolve a matter. And I'll tell you a lot of ideas how you can avoid this trap and what you can do to be more productive. And then number 4, writing good emails will help you communicate better in all other contexts, not just when you are writing a business email, but when you're writing a memo, when you're writing perhaps a cover letter, when you are writing a briefing or a summary note. It helps your written communication to a great deal when you pay attention to the structure, to the form, to the message. You put some thought into the way you build up an email as a narrative. So that's pretty much my pitch. And then as a personal story, I didn't put a slide on that, but wanted to share something that made me realize how powerful emails can be. And it's a little story when we were working with a major client and we had to buy a plane ticket for one of their staff members. And it was a business class plane ticket, transatlantic, so a very expensive plane ticket it was, over 3,000 euros or so. And then the person ended up not flying on this particular flight. And we were entitled to a reimbursement as per the conditions of that particular plane ticket. But the airline company refused to give that reimbursement, and they paid us back something like 30 euros, a ridiculous amount. We said, well, according to the terms, we are entitled to this reimbursement. And the customer service person just refused to move. And then I looked up the email or some contact, perhaps LinkedIn or somewhere else, of the chief marketing officer. And I sent him a very carefully thought about email, making sure that our claim was heard. And pretty much as a result of that single email, the guy agreed and the whole thing trickled down and we got a reimbursement. So this really taught me how important the words are and how much you can achieve by crafting a thoughtful message. And another very important thing is email, especially in a case of contest or some sort of controversy. You don't just rant. I could have said, hey, your airline is horrible. How dare you? This is awful. I really wanted a solution. So we'll talk about how you can be proactive in an email when you really have an ideal solution in mind and you tweak it in a way that it will get you to that result. So with that, let's get into it. What are some good practices, good ideas that you can do when you're crafting emails? And we'll soon transit to a lot of specific examples, and I'll show you a couple of good and bad examples of how you can craft yours. The very first one is there's essentially one question you must ask before sending any email. Is really, what is the number one purpose? What is the number one objective of my message? A lot of people actually fail to do that. Just yesterday, I got an email from a job candidate who was asking for advice, but it wasn't clear from the message whether she was sharing some good news with me about her job hunt. Was it about her frustration that it's difficult to get a job in the current climate? Or was it about asking a specific piece of advice from me? So that number one purpose was not clear from the message and I got lost. And what happens when it's not clear? You do nothing. You basically ignore the email or put it aside or just not answer it in due course because you're confused. So if the reader is unsure what the purpose of the email is, they are not going to act on it. And that's bad because most emails require an answer, or sometimes they don't, but that has to be made clear as well. So the number one purpose can be just simply informing, updating, sharing news with someone, but make it entirely clear, abundantly clear, that it's for your information, that the other person does not need to act on it, is just simply to share some update with them. Sometimes there's a very specific invite or there's a specific request from the other person. Again, that might be the number one purpose, even if you share some updates and certain pieces of information. But if the main purpose is to solicit feedback, make that clear. Another could be that you apologize or you're trying to fix a problem that happened because of you or because of a team member or someone else. But then again, it has to be clear. And then sometimes the email is about open questions that you want to brainstorm, that some decision needs to be taken or something needs to be organized. More often than not, these are not really good to be handled through email. More often than not, you would want to have a quick phone conversation or perhaps a different format, maybe a shared collaborative document, maybe a quick Zoom discussion or Skype or whatever that is. Maybe, if it's possible, an in-person meeting if it's an in-depth question. And of course, when the lockdown is over, you would want to do this in a structured way. But email may not be the best way because everybody would have different ideas and they would go into all directions, and it's just simply not efficient. But realize that early on, if there are a lot of open questions, probably email is not the right tool. So here's the next point. How do you prevent from this multiple back and forth, 15 people jumping in, or just you and another person with one-liner, two-liner emails corresponding as if you were chatting on a messenger app? How do you prevent that? So this is my point I just raised. Is email really the best medium to discuss your issue? That's the very first question. Second question is a really, really good tool. I found this when I read about this. I think it was in the 4-Hour Workweek, a pretty classic by Tim Ferriss. If you haven't read that yet, I highly recommend it. It's really a fascinating book. It's pushing the boundaries. And when it came out, I think about 10 years ago, or perhaps even more, even 15 years ago, it was a major, major hit. Not because everybody thought that a 4-hour work week is really possible, but because of the ideas on productivity and efficiency were so powerful. So I think it was in that book where Tim shared the idea that in an email, again, you want to prevent back and forth all the time. How can you do it most efficiently? You anticipate options. So if I send out an email to someone and I say, here is an invitation to a brainstorming session. If you are available, please join our event at so and so. But already in the email, I anticipate upfront if the person is not available. And I want to give that person options. And I want to tell them what to do in case they are not available. So I say, if you're not available, could you please fill in the following questionnaire? And perhaps I even foresee a C scenario, a number 3 scenario, when the person is available, but just would have some preliminary ideas to share. That I say, if you would like to send your ideas in advance, you can upload that into this particular folder. So in advance, when I'm sending out that message, I already foresee A, B, C scenarios, and I tell the person what they can do upfront. Because if I send out an email saying, are you available to join that meeting? The person will get back to me and say, sorry, I'm not available. Then I send them again an email saying, okay, if you're not available, here's what you could do. And the person says, okay, but I want to share some ideas in advance. So we exchange 5 emails, each with their respective delays, interruptions, and all the bad things that go with it. And we're just not getting from A to B. So anticipating those options, it's really, really a powerful technique if you think about the efficiency part. And then number 3, very similar to this one, when you're scheduling a meeting, always offer alternatives. If there are too many alternatives and too many people involved, use the service called Doodle. It's a really nice one. And that is a powerful way of finding the best time slot where everybody is available, or at least most people are available. I always schedule larger meetings through Doodle because there are just so many agendas to coordinate. And then there's even an option there. I could be available if I need to, but I'm not necessarily available upfront. So if need be, I think that's what it's called. So that's an idea. But even in an email, I do send out so many invitations or scheduling meetings that I really learned that the best way to say, here are 3 date options where I would be available. And then if none works, could you please also propose 2 or 3 options? And then eventually we'll find something that works for both of us. But simply saying, are you available next week? I mean, come on, what a horrible question that is. It really doesn't make any sense. Are you available next week? Yes, I have 15 different time slots available, but I'm not going to hold all of them free for you and then wait for you to tell me when you graciously are willing to meet me or have a meeting with me. So it really has to be more specific and narrow down the options. So the person, basically, you make it very easy for the other person to make their pick. And that is helpful to them and helpful to you because you also you narrowed the scope of the options. Also be crystal clear about what's the next action to be taken. There are so many emails that I receive where it's just unclear what the other person expects of me. Do you expect an answer, or do you expect me to give you a reply on option A, option B, option C? If the question is, so let's talk about it next time we meet. Okay, that's a little unclear. What do you mean talk about it next time we meet? Is there a decision that needs to be taken right now? Is it an information email that I just need to acknowledge? It's unclear. So it has to be very, very clear what's the next step in the email. So action must be emphasized. And then the final point in this general pieces of advice to empathize. And I love this idea where you make it easy for the other person to say yes or to say no. A lot of people feel very uncomfortable saying no. If you send out an invite to a person for a coffee and that person is just busy or honestly just doesn't feel like meeting with you, but they don't want to be rude, they want to be polite, give them upfront the option not to meet you, and they will be more likely to say yes. Here's what I mean. If you say, I completely understand how busy you are, and I guess there are many other commitments you need to see to. If you nevertheless have 20 minutes to spare for a phone call or a coffee, I would greatly appreciate that. So you immediately set them at ease that, yes, I know how busy you are. I know how many things you have on your plate, but still, I would be grateful. And the person would say, oh, they hear me, they understand me, they get me. I'm more willing to say yes. Whereas if you had said, would you be available for a 20-minute meeting? I would say, no, I'm too busy, and then just simply decline. So this is very, very helpful, but also for many other things. Let's say you're asking for €1,000 budget for a get-together or a team meeting somewhere. Again, assuming that there is a meeting which is allowed. And you're writing that email to your boss, who's the budget owner, and you say, I understand that €1,000 might seem a bit excessive for this kind of meeting, but the reason why I'm asking is so and so and so. So you immediately put the boss at ease, saying, hey, I know I'm asking a lot of money for something seemingly small, or perhaps in your eyes, less important, but I'm giving you the very reasons why you should agree to it. So immediately with this anticipation of the objections you might get, you become more persuasive. So let me take one or two questions before we go further. And there are many, many other things in my bag to share with you. First one is, do you believe that brevity is useful for professional emails in general? Short answer, yes. Following my own advice, this was a very brief answer. But to expand on that, brevity means, at least in most cases, that your thinking is rather clear because you thought through the options and you managed to distill it to the bare essence. If brevity is the other extreme, where you're brief because you're unclear, well, that's certainly not helpful, but brevity generally is appreciated. If an email is longer than 5 paragraphs, perhaps even 10 paragraphs, but sometimes even just 5 paragraphs, most people would either not read it or they might just put it aside and not deal with it for a good while because it requires too much cognitive effort to process it. What you could do there, cut it shorter, and if you have more to say, put that in a Google Doc or put that in a shared document or put that in a PDF attachment and put those ideas into those detailed documents. But the email itself generally needs to be as short as humanly possible without compromising on the content. Next one, the subject line. Subject line is not a particularly difficult thing, but still many people do not pay sufficient attention to it. So here are a couple of ideas you might want to consider. The first one is put the most important information first in the subject line, because many people would be looking at their email on their mobile device, where the character count and the display length will limit how much they see. Even in Outlook or other apps, the preview usually shows only a couple of words from the subject line. So if you have an invitation to a person, put that as the first word, not the last one. Or if you need input needed or action needed or FYI, try to put that first in the subject line and the rest afterwards, thinking that only the first 4 or 5 words might be displayed up front, and that will determine whether the person will actually open your email and attend to it. Number 2, ideally don't put more than 5 or 6 words into the subject line. I've seen subject lines which were pretty much a novel, very, very long, very, very descriptive. So think very carefully about each word in the subject line to the bare essence, like a telegram. Telegrams used to be very, very short because of the technical limitations. So only the most important words in military style you want to put into the subject line. If you start a new topic, change the subject line. So most email apps, as you know, they do threads and conversation views, which is basically based on the subject of previous emails, and then they turn that into a thread. If you have a new topic, you want to break that thread, you probably want to change the subject line also to help the other person find and archive or review that email based on that new topic. And if you're urgent, you need an urgent reply or something is really urgent, put that into the subject line. Be very clear about it, or perhaps add the deadline into it. Immediately people will see that and act on it. And then just one word on CCing and BCC, so the carbon copy, where it's coming from, and the blind carbon copy is always the person who needs to take some action and who's directly addressed should be in the to field, and the CC is only the one who needs to be informed but not necessarily needs to take action. Sometimes I'm also lazy. I don't necessarily always move people around from these different fields, but it's better because, again, some email apps even highlight the messages where you are the only person or you are a person in the to field and not necessarily in the CC or BCC fields. And then another nice piece, and it's a little related but not directly, let's say you want to say thank you to a person for the great input they gave, or that they were helpful, or they came to your workshop and you appreciate what they did, and you just want to praise them, you want to thank them. And the very nice way of actually doing it is you send an email to that person and you copy their boss. Oh, people love that. Obviously, only if it's positive feedback. But people really appreciate that, yeah, my boss was made aware by this happy client, by this happy business partner, by this happy colleague, and they just basically let the boss know. Because you probably would not forward an email praising you to the boss and say, hey, boss, look how good I did, and this client is happy. You might do that from time to time, but normally it's really much more powerful when the client or the partner or the other person does it and makes you look good. All right, here's a pretty nice tool that I've been using for many years. It's a Gmail plugin. So if you're using Gmail, then you can use this, but I think it even exists for Outlook. I would need to double check it. It's called Boomerang. So if you just put Boomerang for Gmail, it's a tool you can plug in. The tool, what it does, it does many things. You can schedule emails and you can follow up on emails that were not answered before a given time. So if I send an email to the Budapest team and I schedule it that I want that email to be bounced back into my inbox, if I don't get a reply within 2 days, it will do that. So I can nag them and drive them crazy why they have not responded. But they always respond. They're a fantastic team. What this tool actually does is a little more. It might be a premium version, I'm not sure. It is a very helpful idea for today's purposes. And this is not about the tool per se, but the concept it brings. It analyzes your email of how likely it is that you're going to get a response. They called it respondable. I'm not sure it's a word in the English dictionary, but definitely a great idea. And the kind of items they analyze is helpful, I find. The subject length, and you see that there's always a red zone and a green zone, where when it's green, the subject length is, say, 5-6 words, the one I mentioned, it's in the green zone, there's likely to be have to an answer. If the subject is too short or there's no subject, it's much less likely you'll get a response. And then again, if it's beyond the 5, 6, 7 mark, it gets into the red zone where it's just too lengthy. The word count of the email, it depends on the topic and so many factors, but again, there is a too short and too long version of it. Question count, I love that part. If an email has 1 to 3 questions, there is more likely to get an answer. If it has 5 questions, it's less likely to get an answer because people think, damn, I need to think about all those 5 questions. It's going to take me a lot of thinking. Oh, I'd rather move on to the next email. So keep that relatively limited to 1 to 3 questions and you'll get a response. But having a question is a very powerful technique, and it's something I'll come back to in a few minutes. By the way, just a caveat, make sure you check the privacy settings if you're working on confidential stuff, because this tool obviously has access to emails, so make sure that there's nothing too overly sensitive. And then a couple of other stuff you see on the screen, reading level, so how complicated words you're using, and then other stuff like positivity, how positive you put the tone inside your email, how polite you are, and the subjectivity. Those are just add-ons. So it's a nice concept, especially when it comes to the word count, subject length, and question count, that will have a major impact on the response rate to your email. Okay, so time for a bit of practice, and I'll let you read this email and decide whether it's a good one or not. So perhaps I read it out while you're also reading. So subject is stakeholder conference details. Mr. Smith, I'm contacting you on behalf of EU Training regarding the upcoming EU Careers Post-COVID-19 conference. To organize a successful event, I need to know if you're going to publish a press release before or after the event. As regards the approval process, I guess your director would like to be involved. Shall we set up a meeting with her in the coming weeks? You're welcome at our office, so our project managers can join too if needed. To understand our approach better, I'm attaching our detailed 9-page event guidelines so we can discuss the relevant points at our meeting. What do you think? Do you think it's a good email? Is it a bad email? And if it's bad, why? Maybe just share 1 or 2 points with me so I can get your thoughts on that. Okay, letting the answers come in. I see in the meantime that there's a question about signatures. That's something I'll come back to later because I have some slides on that. Okay, so I can see you think it's unclear. Concrete meeting date is missing. It's 9 pages. Of course, that's ridiculous. Lack of clarity. Indeed, he didn't use doodle, that's for sure. No dear at the start. Exactly. So overall, it's a pretty bad email. It looks nicely written. Grammatically, it's correct, but it's a bad email from an effective productivity perspective. It just does not respect all the stuff we talked about. So here's my sample solution, how I would rewrite this email to make it just more helpful. So certainly the subject line would be changed and say request for a meeting. It's a very clear ask. So when I talked about the #1 single reason you're writing the email, well, there's a request for a meeting. It's clear for the receiver that this is what the sender wants. And then providing some details that it's about the EU Career Conference details. Dear Mr. Smith, so certainly with the dear, because starting with Mr. Smith, in the US and American emails, they often start with your first name. So I often get emails from the US saying András. And at first, it was a little strange for me because my mom would call me András when I did something wrong without any sort of diminutive or other terms. So I said, did I do something wrong? But certainly not, but that's just a more US way of addressing people in emails. The more European, perhaps British custom is starting with a dear, and I like that. Even for Americans, I think it's nice, that European feeling when you start your email with a dear. So dear Mr. Smith, as the event coordinator at EU Training, Europe's largest website and training service for EU careers, I'd like to request a virtual meeting. Why did I put that little line in there, Europe's largest website and training service? I did that to raise trust. And trust is such an important element, especially when you're sending emails to an unknown person or person who does not necessarily know you or may have heard of you, but they have only superficial knowledge. If there was no prior contact between you and the receiver, establishing some level of trust becomes really important. Europe's largest website and training service that gives a certain frame that we are a serious business and we're getting in touch with you for some serious matter. And then to make sure the event is a success, I'd be grateful to have your views on the following details and 3 bullet points. I really like bullet points. If you listen to previous webinars I covered, I often talk about how nice bullet points make a certain writing and how much more visually appealing and easier to digest they make it. Try to use bullet points whenever you can, because it's really clear from this list that this is the agenda I'd like to discuss. And here's another one: I'd like to find the best time to discuss. And then here's an underline saying, would any day at 10 a.m. between the 25-28 May be feasible for you? I do acknowledge it's a little open, but it's still, the scope has been limited. So I say 10 a.m., that's a very specific time, even if I'm available the entire day. But I put there a frame of 4 days, 25, 26, 27, 28, 4 days that the person can easily choose from. So it's a relatively easy choice for that person because it's already been framed to some degree. If I had said, are you available on the week of the 25 May, they need to do a lot of thinking when they are available. They would have a tiny anxiety thinking, yeah, I'm available then, but I want to write back, but I'm not going to tell this person if they are available since I am the one being invited. So there becomes a lot of back and forth. That's exactly we do not want. And then offering that I can set up a virtual meeting and just simply being helpful. And I say, I look forward to a reply in the next days. Then again, it's a little nudge. It's a little effort. It's a little push to the other person, very politely and gently saying, please answer relatively fast. So this gives them the idea that they need to reply within a few days. And then I put the event manual as a postscriptum, as a PS, saying I'm attaching a 1-page extract, because obviously you don't want to send a 9-page and have the other person read through this, which they anyways they're not going to do. And then, yes, I see the question, isn't the underline a bit pushy? Yeah, I think there are different schools of thought. It's it might be a little maybe not pushy, but it might be a little suggestive. And if it's not your taste or not your liking, it works without it absolutely fine. It really works. In this case, if it's really important that the other person replies because there's a deadline in the project, you might want to do that to make it stand out. If it's a general first request, you may just not do that exactly for that reason, because some might perceive it as a little pushy. And I got here a question about what was the word, misgendering a person. So not necessarily knowing whether who you're writing to, it's a man or woman. And I think Lenke, who is behind the screen, and you can see her, but Lenke has probably had that a lot, because Lenke is a very unique name, even in Hungarian, but internationally nobody knew whether she is a she or it's a he. So sometimes in the signature you just put MS or some reference that that she's a woman. So it can be tricky if you don't know whether the person's gender. You might want to Google around. Generally, you can find out, or you just say dear manager, or try to refer to the person's post for lack of a better option in order not to offend them even involuntarily. So this email hopefully is a better way of presenting that information. And we can talk briefly about the body of the email. So what you might want to put inside before we look at a couple of other examples. So one is the opening, exactly what we just talked about, whether to use dear or not. Generally using dear so-and-so, it works fine. And rather be more polite than less polite. So simply saying hi, whatever, hi first name, is not necessarily the best way forward. The other one is whether to apologize or to thank them. I love this concept, and there was some nice poster on that. I'll try to look that up and share that with you afterwards, of how you can turn an apology into a thank thank you kind of message. What do I mean? If you haven't responded to an email for 2 weeks, even though you were expected or you were supposed to do that, and to say, I apologize for not answering to you sooner. I apologize for not being able to meet that deadline. I apologize. Yes, that's a pretty common way of starting an email. But you could say, well, I thank you for your patience regarding my reply. Thank you for understanding that I couldn't get back sooner. This is such a nice way of even empowering the other person to say, hey, you're a generous person because I thank you for something, for being so helpful and patient and understanding. So if you can frame your message in that positive tone, that's really, really nice. Another idea, reference to previous exchange if you have had that sort of exchange. So reference to a meeting, to a lunch, to a conference, to a presentation, or something like that. I hope you're fine or doing well since the last time we had that nice coffee at Plus Lux, whatever. It's really reminding the person that, hey, we had a previous contact and it was a few weeks ago, a few months ago, a few years ago. And then a very important point, if you ask a question inside the email, ask a question inside the email. This sounds a little repetitive, but the idea is don't phrase something as a statement, but rather as a question. Here's what I mean. If you send out an invitation to a person, you might say, I really hope that you're available to speak at my conference. That's a statement. But what you could do, phrase it as a question because it's really a visual hook. The other person will be just so much more interested in answering it if it's a question, because we are kind of trained to answer questions when we are asked. So you could say, would you be available to speak at that conference at my event? So then you phrase it as a question and it immediately grabs the eye. That's what I mean as a standalone question or as a question. But the first one is standalone. Try to put that in a separate line inside your email, not at the end of a paragraph, not in the middle of a paragraph, but as a separate standalone line. It really catches the eye, that little question mark, and gets people to answer with much more speed and accuracy. And then the scope, try to limit that, as we did in the previous example. Would you be available on this week, on these days, etc., and not to make it completely open. Sometimes it's valid to say in an email, what do you think? Question mark. That's okay. If it's really open-ended, that's fine. It can work in some cases, but the more you can limit the scope of the question, the better it is. And then how many hyperlinks you should put? Perhaps one or two you could, if it points to an external resource, if it points to a background material, if it points to a more detailed document, because your email would otherwise be too long. Then you could include those hyperlinks. Otherwise, don't burden your emails with more than 2 or 3 hyperlinks, because even spam filters might just simply block it from being delivered. And then a couple ideas, should you bold or underline? As I said before, if it's really, really urgent, important, and there are good reasons, you might underline, perhaps bold, but by and large, I don't like it so much, unless we're talking about headers. So you might want to put certain little titles inside your email and then have some bullet points underneath. That helps the reader visually orientate better. Then you can underline and bold. But underlining a line or a sentence only if it's really, really justified. And titles, bullets, numbering, they just work magic. And the @ sign is when a certain task is assigned to one person, because it's a group email and there are multiple people in it, and 2 or 3 people have to take some action. Then you can put the little @ sign so people see what is their part in the overall task list. But bullets, numbering, they really work magic. If you have 5 questions, well, don't have 5 questions, as we said before, but maybe 2 or 3 questions, then number those. It really helps the reader concentrate so much better. If those questions are not numbered, but they are in different paragraphs, you will just get a slower, less accurate response. And then be very careful with relative dates, especially if you're emailing around across different continents. So to say, are you available tomorrow? Always make sure that you put tomorrow, Thursday, or yesterday, Tuesday, depending on your current time zone, but make sure that you're very clear on the exact specific date. And if it's a timing, put the time zone in it. Even in Europe, we have so many time zones. If you just think about the UK or Ireland or all the way to Greece, you have different time zones. So make sure that you're clear about which time zone is applicable for a given meeting. And then newsletters, that's a story on its own, and we're not covering it today. It's really about business emails as a person to person or persons to persons, whereas newsletter is a different genre. But a very handy tool is called Mail Merge. I don't know if you've heard of it, or some of you may, others may not have, where Mail Merge is used to send emails one by one, because it gives the feeling that the person got that email directly, individually, personally from you. So you can look into that. There are even some plugins for Gmail, and there are different workarounds. It's mostly a Microsoft tool, and you can send, as I said, these one-on-one emails, even if it's a mass email. And then finally, before we look at a couple of other examples and case studies, what sort of sign-off should you use? Is talk to you soon, best regards. Usually best regards is a safe bet. Or looking forward to your answer, best regards. That again gives a clear indication what your expectation is. And then signature, usually using images as signatures, not very helpful because many mail programs would block it and it just wouldn't look good. There are even services where they pull in information from an external website that again is not very handy these days in the age of very severe spam filters. So usually text with a bit of formatting, perhaps with one or two links to your organization, that works. But anything beyond that, again, try to keep it relatively simple. So let's look at two examples, but while we do that, or before we do that, let me take one or two questions. When is it better to use bullets and when numbers? That's a good question. I don't think there is any major difference. Perhaps if there's a sequence to the steps the other person needs to take, so 1, 2, 3, 4, there's an order that they need to follow, numbers would work better. But then if you have perhaps if you have questions, I would probably number them, because it's easy to see, oh, there are 3 questions I need to answer. Whereas if you're just listing, you're passing information, bullet point would work better. Because if you say, here are the 5 things that you might want to consider. And actually in one of my examples, you will see that I'm using bullets instead of numbers. And perhaps that will give an answer to this question. Should we use a written or an e-signature in our professional emails and documents? I think I answered that to some degree, where you probably want to have some formatting and an e-signature, but perhaps you mean like a handwritten kind of a signature? Probably no. And again, because it's an image and it might complicate things. And just simply use information about your organization, your role, and your contact details. That's what you want to do, because the recipient will want to know where are you in the organization and how can they find out more about your organization to make sure that they can trust you. And then here's one more. What do you think of requesting notification that the email was read? Generally, I dislike it. I find it a bit intrusive. Many email apps even block it. I need to give my special consent that it should be sent back. I think it's a little intrusive. So I think you should pursue it with your words and not necessarily with those tools. So here's one example, and hopefully you'll find it as a positive example, because it's an invitation that we often send, well, not often, but we send out when we're organizing actually this particular conference. So this is in my different role, not as EU training, but with Public Affairs Council, an organization I work for. And I wanted to share this with you because hopefully it's an interesting example where you can see in the subject line, invitation as keynote speaker immediately gives a very clear indication to the person what role I'm trying to assign to them as an event guest. And I started again with the first line where I upfront say, here is my ask. Here's the very specific thing I'm asking from you. So the very first paragraph gives away everything. It really has a summary about the event date, about which organization I'm representing, which conference, and where. So this is like the first paragraph is not an introduction. It immediately tells a person what I want from them. The other one is, as you may recall, our organization, this is about trust. We are a serious player, we're a serious organization, and please take us seriously. Then comes about the event, where I say, what is it about? And what organizations, what companies will join it? That again is about trust, that it's worthy of your time to attend. So if you're inviting a person to speak at an event, it's worthy of their time because there are some big names there that they want to be associated with. And then comes the part, what do I expect you to do at that particular event? That is the title of the presentation. There is more information, a bit of background. And here comes the tricky part. Let me try to see if I can get to draw. Here is the tricky part where I say, I fully understand if you're unable or unavailable to accept this invitation. Should that be the case, I hope you could perhaps designate a member of your team instead. So I'm making an easy out for the person, but the alternative would be, hey, why don't you send someone? Because I really want someone from this particular organization to speak at my event. So this is the anticipation part. This is where I'm saying, hey, I want an alternative. And then a couple of reassurance and the question phrased as a question. Would you please let me know if you can accept? So it's a very clear question that the other person should be able to answer. So this is one. Now let me know, do you like this? Do you think it's good? Anything you want to change? I'm hoping it's a good example, but obviously I'm not, this is a subjective area where I might be able to improve certain parts. Okay, good. Wow, I feel very validated. Thank you. You're very generous with your feedback. Here's another one, which worked pretty nicely for us. Say panel speaker invitation. And I even put there the time and the date. I just made it up for today, but this is actually almost a verbatim example that I used quite recently. So this was about another panel in the context of the COVID and the lockdown, saying a lot of, say, empathy. It's to a person that I know. So it's not a cold email to an organization, but it's a person I know. So hope you and your family are doing well and you can still get some work done with your team despite the dire circumstances. So this is a sort of connecting on a more empathetic, emotional level. I'm contacting you after we spoke with a few of our members, and it seems everyone is looking for ideas how to address this new normal. And here's the question, hence my invitation, would you be open to sharing with others, etc.? So this is a nice way of saying, okay, hey, I think you would be a great speaker. Are you willing to share your tips and ideas? So this is a way to phrase a question where I'm not 100% decided on what exactly the person should talk about, but still I want them to participate in one capacity or another. And the reason I actually brought this in as an example is because of the bullet points. So we did talk a fair bit about it. I saw some questions there. And here I upfront listed a lot of practical pieces of advice or practical ideas how this would look. And it's just such an easy thing to review for the person. You say the format we had in mind, and in the bullet, I upfront tell them tons of seemingly technical information, but I want to make it easy for them to say yes. So I even put there, no PowerPoint or other visual material, so only minimal preparation is required from you. So the person would say, yes, I'm so busy, and the kids are screaming, and there's just so much on my plate, and emails keep coming in. So I only need minimal preparation. Okay, what the hell? I'll say yes. So this is a nice way of making it easy for them to accept it. So, and here again in the end, do you think you could accept this invitation? We'd be so glad if you did. Call this emotional manipulation, but this is for a good cause. So let's call that persuasion, where I say, hey, you're such a great person. We'd be so happy if you complied. You know, I didn't want to really give them an easy way out. So I put that there, hey, please say yes, because this would be great. And then comes case study number 2, where you mess something up. Obviously, that never happens to anyone. Sarcasm intended. Well, do mess up from time to time. And ever since we've been running EU training and I've been involved with other projects and organizations, I've seen a lot of emails from customers. And sometimes it's completely justified because the website had some technical bugs or some other things. There was a miscommunication or mishap. So some things do happen. And how do you respond to that? How do you find a way where the person, and especially in a business context, a customer is not going to hate you for the rest of their life and leave your business and tell everyone how awful you are? So there are ways you can address it without compromising on your own values and without pointing fingers at other team members. Because let's face it, that's another thing you definitely don't want to do, even if it was colleague X or colleague Y who just completely forgot about responding to that email or just didn't know how to operate a certain feature on the website or in your project or in your business. So here is the problem statement, a critical email. You get an email like this and you are not feeling very good afterwards. So it says major privacy issue. It says, hello all. I'm very upset you put my photo and bio on the event page and it's already showing up in web searches for my name, despite the fact we agreed you'd wait until I received approval from my board to speak at your conference. This puts me in a very uncomfortable position towards my boss. I want you to take it off as soon as possible, and I probably won't be able to speak at your event as a result of this breach of trust. I'm waiting for your confirmation and update. Oops, this is not an email you ever want to receive, which doesn't mean you will not receive similar emails or you have not received similar emails. What do you do to this one? Now, if we were in a less time-bound setting, I would probably tell you, hey, try to draft a reply and try to send or try to think about ways of appeasing, calming this angry customer or this angry speaker or this angry partner without alienating them and hopefully keeping them as a speaker at your event. But now that we have only a couple of minutes left, I'll tell you how I would suggest to approach this matter. Maybe give it 5 seconds of thought of what sort of sentences you would put there. You are probably wondering, should I apologize or not apologize? That's a fascinating topic again, whether apologies work or they work just in a different way. But let's see one approach. So here's my sample reply to this critical email where, and I see Maria saying, absolutely apologize. Yes, I love having discussions, especially when I run courses on this in classroom. There's such a fascinating discussion of the sorry camp and the don't say sorry camp. And I'm somewhere in between, perhaps less into saying sorry, because there are so many other ways you can apologize without saying the word sorry. Here's one of them. You say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I fully understand how frustrating it must have been to find your name online despite our promise to you. I'd like to reassure you that I'll personally and urgently take care of this matter. It was in fact my mistake that I forgot to flag your name to our web team and let them know that it should not yet be published. And I just sent an immediate request to the team to remove your name, photo, bio from the event page. I'll let you know as soon as the above has been taken care of, most probably within 2 days or less. We are also looking into ways to improve our internal communication to avoid this from happening. Despite this unfortunate error, I sincerely hope you'll still consider being the speaker at our event. Your insights and expertise would add tremendous value to the conference. Thank you so much for your patience, and I shall do my best to fix it quickly. Should you have any questions in the meantime, I'm available via email or phone. Now, here's the trick. Do you see the word sorry in it? Well, look carefully because it's not there. So this is what I said earlier, that this is an apology of sorts, and hopefully a good one, without actually saying the word, I'm so sorry, and I truly apologize. So the trick is that, and again, I'm not saying this is an overall rule that you must never do that, or there's any strict rule to avoid these words. You can certainly use that if you feel like it. And in some cultures, that word just, it must be said if you mess something up. So what happens here is there are certain building blocks building blocks that you can put in here, and I applied here with each paragraph. And I'll walk you through those building blocks in the following slides. So what happens there, basically there are 7 steps in here. It's the first one is that you reassure the person that you heard what they wanted to say. Say, I understand this is the problem. I hear that this is a major thing. You kind of restate what the problem was. Said, well, this is totally the situation. You just reassure them that, yes, I'm listening. I heard what you said. Number 2 is you empathize, and I might be using this word a lot today, but this is such a crucial element, with the feeling that it must be frustrating. I can only imagine how frustrating it must have been. I can only I can only imagine that this must have been a really shocking thing to discover your name despite our promises. And then number 3, you put a bit of context. You say, here's what happened. And you may or may not want to explain. Keep it very short. You don't want to give too many details. You definitely don't want to blame the client and say, hey, you didn't tell me that you didn't want this, or it was unclear from your email that you didn't want your name on the website, or it was all your fault, or why the hell are you so angry? This is not a big thing. Do not shift the blame. You just say, this is what happened, perhaps in one line, and you may not even want to give those details that it was a miscommunication, but you can take responsibility even if it's not your responsibility. You can say, I understand that our team didn't live up to these expectations. I will personally take care of this matter. That is taking responsibility for the solution. And then number 4 is action. How are you going to fix the problem? That's what the person is truly concerned about, that I will immediately have it removed. I will make sure that it's going to be done, but don't overpromise, underdeliver. Make sure you are realistic. Here's another tricky part, or not tricky, but perhaps helpful, is fix the problem by future-proofing it. That you tell the person what actions are you going to do on a systemic level to prevent such problems from happening again. And you may not already know because it's just too quick or too fast. But you can say, well, we'll look into the ways we can improve our processes to avoid this from happening again. Or we will have an internal discussion on why this happened and what we can do about this. And this really makes a lot of people happy. It tells them that, hey, you take their problem seriously, and it also will help others from facing this problem again. And then number 6 is thanking them for their patience, and essentially number 7, telling them what's the next step. So expectations about the next step and what's happening. So I'll put the email again in the context of those 7 steps. So here's the thank you for bringing this to my attention. I love this phrase because this is thanking the other person instead of saying, oh damn, I just realized what a mistake we did after your email. Here is the empathy part. Then comes the reassurance and the taking charge, taking responsibility. It was my mistake. And then here's the fix. I just sent an immediate request. Here's the future proofing. And then comes, despite this error, I hope you will consider being a speaker. And here's a bit of pleasing and a bit of niceties. Your insights and expertise would add so much value. So making sure that the person feels really important. And then thanking you so much for your patience, and should you have any questions, etc. And perhaps just one more point here, this 2 days, this is where I set a very concrete deadline until which I'm going to come back to the person. So that's pretty much it. With one final slide, I wanted to just share this resource with you. We'll send it out in the follow-up message or the follow-up email we send after the webinar. It's slightly different, but still related to today's discussion. I wrote a couple months ago this one-pager, which is freely available, and we'll send you the link and the PDF of working with EU Commission staff. And it's not strictly and only on communication. Only point number 10 is really about messaging, but how do you interact in a broader communication setting with Commission staff, or for that matter, any public service, perhaps even on a member state level, which are the considerations and things you want to bear in mind to make sure that it's positive on both sides. So with that, I thank you for your attention, for your time. I think there's perhaps 1 more minute for some questions. And let me take 1 or 2. One is, what do you think about shorter email and add the formal invitation details in attachment? Well, it depends on how, for most invitations, it fits in the email, and people would rather read an email than click on various attachments unless they have to. So put more into the email if you can, and in a more targeted way than in an attachment. And then, in case of inviting speakers, what do you think about mentioning we cover costs or not in the first email? Usually that works because you want to anticipate what people might object to the invitation, and one of them might be the cost and the logistical part. And if you address it up front, that helps them say yes easier. And then 1 or 2 more questions, which we might come back to, but in respect of everyone's time, I really thank you for your attention and your input and your feedback, much appreciated. And make sure to send us any follow-up questions or anything we can be helpful with. Or if this is a kind of topic that you or your organization want to hear more of, let me know, because I really enjoy and I'm available to do this in a more in-depth way as a workshop or any other format. So with that, thank you so much for Veronica and Lenka for helping me. And this, I believe, is the final episode of our webinar series linked to the lockdown and the coronavirus situation. But we might keep doing some free webinars of this sort in the future as well, with less frequency, not necessarily on a weekly basis, but we're looking at the different options. If you have topic ideas, send us your thoughts in a nicely crafted email. I'm not going to judge it, but send us your ideas. We're always happy to hear from you. And obviously, in the context of EU careers and exams, you're welcome to check out all the resources on eutraining.eu. Well, thanks again. Have a nice day, and to be continued.